AI is being used by criminals to lure young people.
Or that manufacturers can work with and maybe even provide some funding for some of these infrastructure upgrades, the better.
The teacher's responsibility to look after that data belonging to those young people. So during a video call, I'm very conscious that if I've got children in a classroom, all the other countries joining, they have to also be in a classroom. The French government have their own national video conference platform.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Signal Flow. I am your host, as always, Ben Thomas. You know, one area that our technology has always supported is the world of education. You know, going back to having MacBooks and original Macs in classrooms all the way up to iPads and technologies. Now, obviously, leveraging a lot of video conferencing and AI technologies as well. Really, the education sector has always been a place where our industry has thrived. But there are a lot of new challenges and opportunities and risks that pop up, especially as you bring that conversation globally, even outside of North America. And I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper today because it's very nuanced and there's a lot of complicated questions to ask. And to have that conversation, I brought on the video conferencing and online safety lead for the London Borough of Redbridge, and that's Mina Patel. Mina, a familiar face to many of us in the industry. It's great to have you on.
Thank you for inviting me, Ben. I'm looking forward to speaking to you.
You know, Mina, I am curious, right? It's a massive conversation to have, right? Because the globalized standards are a little bit different, but maybe, you know, for those of us who are kind of thinking about this for the first time, where are we sort of in the world of technology and education, maybe at a high level?
Regards to video conferencing?
Yes, specifically, yeah.
So where are we and where do we stand? And I think the onset of lockdown has made video conferencing prevalent in every single school. I work with the K-12 sector, and more than ever, teachers are able to click on links. This is for even everyday school operations, for meetings, for not just for teaching and learning. Children are back in the classrooms in England, so everything is face-to-face. It's not remote anymore. And I'm sure that's the case for many parts of the world now. So teachers aren't expected to teach remotely, as they were doing from their homes during lockdown. But what they were all forced to do because of that was actually experience a live video call. So they're not afraid to use it so much. And the technology's changed as well. So everything's up in the cloud. So all the cloud platforms, three main ones in particular, in education, were developed. Two of them a bit later on. One was a professional video conference platform. But the others have developed into some really great video conferencing professional platforms, which in education, I work in the education inclusion department at the London Borough of Redbridge at local government level. So we are all based on using Microsoft Teams, our timetables, our scheduling, our meetings. So even for me working in education, supporting schools, I use video conferencing all the time.
Is prevalent in our schools now. And you know, one thing that I'm really curious about as well, and you could speak to this, you and I have had a conversation about this before, is that the standards sort of change from region and locality to in country, just they're different, right? And I know one example you shared was sort of the French government has some certain restrictions, and there are different places across the global regions that have different requirements. What are some of those things maybe that you see where some of the expectations change by region or by country?
Well, I feel as though the only country in the world that seems to be standing alone and, in my opinion, trying to do the right thing for their young people is France. So the French government have their own national video conference platform. They have banned the use of the three main enterprise solutions that are being used across the world at the moment, basically because they are protecting the data of their young people, so their images and voices. And I work very closely with the Dijon area in France. We do lots of global partnerships because the children in England want to learn French and the French children want to learn English. So what better way to do it than over a video call, right? So and to meet their peers and actually speak and practice the language they're learning in the classrooms. So the French love doing it, and so do the children here. And what we found, one of the positives about the cloud platforms, let me say, is that since lockdown, the quality of the course, we can talk about this later on, some of the positives, is absolutely excellent. You know, with all the AI that's been built into it, and as it's been developed, all those three platforms have, you know, excellent quality calls where it is literally plug and play. The teachers click on a call, and lo and behold, you're speaking to a class of children, you know, 30 children here in England, speaking to 30 in France. Now, so I've been working with the French government for a number of years, before lockdown and even now. So after lockdown, I contacted them again, and they refused to meet me on Teams. The lady who worked in a similar role to mine, she said because at government level, she has a similar role to mine, she's not allowed to use Teams. Anyway, met with her. She'd sent me a link in French with the French flag on in the corner, just like you sent me the link today to join our recording on the podcast. I didn't quite understand the French, but I assumed you just click on the link, rejoin or something. It was written in French. I saw their flag, clicked on the link, and lo and behold, I was in a call as I am with you today. And it's the French government's national video conference platform. The lady at government level that I work with, Geraldine, in France, then went on to explain to me that the government have stopped their primary and secondary schools from using the three main enterprise platforms because they do not want their young people to be sharing their personal data with them. And they want to protect that data. And in order to do that, the government's platform is being used. And even as local government employees, they're not allowed to use any of those platforms. However, once they go to university level, it's different. And then they're old enough after 18 to use those platforms. But in schools, they're not. So I was quite happy. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's a secure link, from the French government. And I clicked on it and it worked. I was happy to use it. So when we connect to France now, here, we normally, our schools would send the link from one of those three platforms. We don't send the link because we're not allowed to. The French school sends us a link and we click and meet the teachers and the children that way. So it works for us. We don't mind. I think it's a good thing that the French have done that. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. It's taken probably quite a lot of funding for them to set that up. I'm assuming data centers, they've got a workforce managing it. They've, whatever's gone behind that to set that up. But credit to them for doing that. And I think they did it at the right time because it just happened just before lockdown. I think they made that decision. Whereas other countries weren't in the position to do that. So they were forced along the lines to choose from, in England, we had to choose from two, our schools did. And that is kind of a commercial agreement that they may have had, or also it comes down to finances. Governments don't necessarily have that funding to set up their own national platforms. Or they may not have the specialists able to advise. And then they rely on the technology companies to advise them. And we need the tech companies. I'm not saying that the enterprise companies that we're speaking about necessarily are doing bad. They're offering amazing technologies to us. But at the end of the day, it is about data. And the most sought after data is data of young people. Our data, Ben, our data's old. It's been around the block so many times, it's not even worth much, right? Even if they tried selling it on the dark web, right? We'll go for peanuts, right? But the young people in schools right now, they're not online. You've not heard their voices. You've not seen their faces. You don't know their names. You don't know anything about them. So that data is worth a lot. And whatever platforms they use, however you hook them onto wherever, it's worth a lot. So the French just want want that responsibility not to go down onto the schools or and they want them to decide once they're older. And for us in England, about 15 years ago, we had our own national video conference platform. We were ahead of the French. Can you believe it? So we had, through JISC and Janet, the JISC Academic Network, we had a video conference platform called vSeam. Back then, we would log on with our codecs, with gatekeepers' IP numbers. And we're London School, so we were given E164 numbers to put our codecs on so they could connect securely on the network. They had a cloud platform. It was quite basic. They were developing it back then, but you were able to send a link via email back then. We used to scrutinize that back then because it's dangerous to send a video link by email, right? What if someone hacked into that email, it was shared somewhere else and it shouldn't have? So we were all about sharing over a network via a gatekeeper with an IP number back then. But anyway, that existed. It was there and it was owned by our government. So we had a new government that came into place and they needed to make cuts. So they sold it. They sold it to a tech company up in Scotland. And, we had a huge team. We had network support up in Edinburgh University. So you could call them, when back then when we used to have pixel loss in the call, bandwidth issues. It was all kinds of all the things that we used to have happen. But we used to have a help desk to help as well. So the government then was really thinking ahead of the time. You need government with vision to do something like this. I guess that another government came along and they had to make cuts as well. I understand that too. So they sold the company and then we were left on our own, basically. And then we had lockdown and then all the cloud companies started coming on board.
It's interesting, right? And I thank you for breaking it down so well, because I think a lot of times, especially for those of us in the States or here in North America, we sort of see things one way and we assume that it looks the same globally, right? But obviously there's different levels of government oversight and intervention and things like that. So the stakeholders are pretty varied. I do want to ask, maybe outside of France, since they've banned some of those things, who typically are some of those key stakeholders, especially maybe in your borough, who are making those decisions, and who's accountable maybe for making sure that the kids are using the technology appropriately and making sure that data is not getting taken or used improperly?
Well, the DFE is accountable. It writes guidelines for AI, for all technologies. And they do their best. And I think at times the technology is moving on so fast for them that it's hard to keep up with guidelines for schools. And in their defense, they try their best. And sometimes schools and teachers are using technologies in ways they may not be aware of as well. And maybe using it in an extent that, they're not aware of. And ultimately, keeping an individual school safe with the pupils safe in that one school, that responsibility comes down to the head teacher, believe it or not. Not even the network manager, not even anybody in IT. It's the head teacher's responsibility. So the head teacher needs to make sure that the network manager is trained. The network manager knows policy guidelines for coming down from the Department of Education. Needs to make sure, is ultimately held responsible should there be a data breach in any way. It's very difficult for head teachers to do this, very difficult for network managers when, they work in schools, small primary schools, small village primary schools. And you can imagine some of the potential breaches that can happen with data and especially when schools and their data is so sought after by hackers. So the government do protect. It's their job to protect us ultimately through the bandwidth that comes in. yeah, and set guidelines for us. But they do lead that responsibility. Then ultimately, the responsibility is down to the user in the schools, the head teacher, the network manager. It's a huge responsibility.
One of the things that intrigues me sort of the most about your job, and I have actually talked about this before, is that, many of these buildings are not what you would think of as modern buildings, right? The infrastructure doesn't exist in the same way. The bathroom builds are totally different. The masonry outside is totally different. And obviously they're not built or designed for technologies like Ethernet and Wi-Fi and things like that. And that presents some natural challenges. What are some of the things maybe that you see uniquely with installing these technologies, particularly video conferencing, in some of these buildings that in some cases are almost 1,000 years old?
Well, some of the buildings, because they are so old, it's very difficult to put the cabling in place, and that when the Wi-Fi doesn't work. And my recommendation for the companies, the AV industries that develop their technologies, that the technologies that they're developing, I mean, the hardware now is brilliant. I've just, I can't name companies, but I've just set one up at one of my high schools right now. I'd love to name it, but it was plug and play. One cable for the power, one for the USB connection straight into the teacher's laptop. And before you know, teacher's laptop connected to the screen in the class. And before you know it, it was a brilliant video conference call. Yeah, it was a video conference bot. And it needs to be simple like that, where there isn't necessary, where you don't have an app, where you don't need to use mobile phones with an app on to control anything. We almost need to go back, and some of the other great technologies I've used with the video conference bars, those that have remote controls. We've almost got to go back a little bit for schools, and a little remote control so you can zoom into the back of the class and move around. But the technologies that are being developed by the AV industry, the video conferencing technologies, are second to none lately. And there are many that suit the classroom perfectly. And going back to the old buildings, they need upgrading. Schools constantly need upgrading for their infrastructure. So the hardware from the VC companies is brilliant and great. But if you have a laptop or if you have a computer and its processor is old, or the network is old, or something needs upgrading. I'm not a network manager, but I don't know. But I speak to many of my network managers at schools, and they're all saying that they need funding to upgrade because the hardware that they are trying to connect to their laptops or to their computers is so advanced that sometimes the graphic cards aren't keeping up, or that's just something basic. I don't know much, but it's just not, it's causing security issues and could potentially cause security issues because the hardware isn't matching, the hardware in the school doesn't match what's being produced now by industry. So schools need investing, a lot of investment in their ICT infrastructure. Definitely.
You're spot on, because I think one of the things that we sometimes forget as an industry is that every piece of technology now, especially technology that's connected to the network, is a potential endpoint for somebody to breach, right? So if I'm using a webcam, or if I'm using a PTZ, or I have a microphone or a soundbar, that is a way for people to be nefarious and gather some of that data. And I think you mentioned it perfectly. The more that manufacturers can work with, and maybe even provide some funding for some of these infrastructure upgrades, the better. I'm curious too. So one of the interesting things that I kind of like that you guys are doing over there is, a lot of the way that you're processing data is far more, I don't know that intentional is right, but far more siloed maybe than here in the States, right? Where we kind of farm our data off to different data centers and things like that. You guys are doing things like building your own data centers to manage that, to maintain privacy, especially for things that are being trained on AI models. Talk to me a little bit about that and how that impacts sort of that classroom experience as well from a technology standpoint. So
the GDPR regulations in England, we are pretty strict. And we are, I'm not saying that they're not in other parts of the world. I work with colleagues in the US as well. and I often participate in huge global conferences with students in the US, and I've got students here. But we have regulations here, whereas the data center has to be EU based. We cannot be sending data over data centers that are in other parts of the world, because of the privacy regulations that exist. Often when we have a video conference call, I have to set up the call. So the link from Zoom comes from me for the other schools around the world to join. And they let me do it. They're quite happy for me to do that. That's fine. But as long as the data comes via our data center here, via Germany, that is fine. And those are just regulations and rules we have here in the UK. They're trying to see. So in lots of ways, our government is doing their best to try and protect us. But then we could always argue they can do more. Yeah, the French are doing a lot. The French have totally locked it down. As I said earlier, credit to them for their young people. We're still doing a good job. It just comes down to investment at the end of the day. And there's no right or wrong in this. And I feel that the more when things are a bit more strict, you still can go ahead and do things, but you've just got more rules to follow. Whereas when things are less of a follow tick list, do's and don'ts, I feel, you can just record a video conference, or it doesn't matter about lots of things. Whereas, and plus my role is online safety. So during a video call, I'm very conscious that if I've got children in a classroom, that all the other countries joining, they have to also be in a classroom. No students are joining from home. There's, because I don't want to risk other adults coming into the call. So I'm constantly looking for things like that. And that all the students are with their teachers now in a call. And if we're having an online debate, that if we're recording, I'm doing the recording. So it gets recorded on our data center, and then I share that recording out. It just gives you have more responsibility, I feel as though, but it's not a bad thing. It's fine. And I think the other countries probably value me doing that. They're quite happy to let me say, right, we can't have that. That's not happening. Or you cannot name students during a call. Yeah. So everyone's like, we've got our names like Mina Patel, Ben Thomas right now. So if we were we'd call it the school name. So that's what would happen.
So Mina, there is a reason I asked about data centers first, because naturally the next question is, how are we creating and sourcing and storing all that data? And naturally it makes you think about AI, right? All the data that we're gathering, whether it's the recordings that you mentioned where you don't want to say people's names, whether it's, faces, names, how am I tracking, people's facial movements and things like that. I don't know that, maybe it looks a little bit different for you over in the UK, so I don't want to be super assumptive, but I do want to ask, how are AI technologies rolling out and kind of scaling into the classrooms for you guys?
Well, in England, very slowly. Let's talk about the positives of AI, and then I'll talk about all the negatives. So the positives for AI, for teachers, I definitely see scope for AI to help them with their planning, lesson planning. And the government has invested in an Oak Academy, which is a school, millions into that school to develop our own national teaching where teachers can write their own lesson plan. So teachers from England can log in and create their lesson plans, share them. The AI learns from other teachers in England. So it meets the same national curriculum, because they're teachers from the same country writing lesson plans, there's going to be lots of similarities and benefits of that. So the government has invested quite a lot of money into Oak Academy. So that's a national platform for teachers for lesson planning, and that would really save a lot of time for teachers. Also in the future for marking, using AI for that for teachers, a lot more for administrative things for teachers. But however, all of this comes with a caution, because the data they put into the AI models or the AI apps that they could be using, they have to be very careful because they are working with young people's personal data or work, and which they are putting onto a language model, which is possibly learning from them. And if it's a huge international one, what's going to happen to that data or that pupil's work, or if there's any sensitive data that's released from there. So teachers are treading with caution because of that. They are not told not to use it by our government. They can use it, but carefully. And the primary schools at the moment are steering clear of it, really. But some teachers want to use it, for, as I said, for planning, for writing reports. I'm not sure if they're writing reports, but for writing and planning, then in which case, if there are specific tools, safe national tools to do that with, they're being encouraged. And pupils, no doubt, are using it. But they are doing their homework. We all know that. We can't stop them. Some schools can say and have said that AI is not to be used for homework, or, that they should write themselves. They're encouraged to do it themselves. And there's software that's been bought by some of our secondary schools to check when it's AI checking for AI.
So the irony is off the charts.
Yes. So there's use for it, but it's going very slowly in education. The students and parents at home are probably using a lot more than the teachers at the moment. But we have to tread with caution because it's our responsibility. As I said, it's the head teacher's responsibility, the teacher's responsibility to look after that data belonging to those young people. So when they're with us during term time from 9 till 3:30, whatever they do, their work, everything about them, we have to protect them and safeguard them. So because of that responsibility, we have to tread cautiously as schools because of the age of the students. And I think it would be very different in universities, I'm sure. There are all kinds of apps being allowed to use, and I'm sure the lecturers are using things, doing things very differently. Assessment will change as a result of AI as well, because handing in a piece of work that's been done, that's potentially been helped by AI, isn't going to be good enough now. So more verbal assessments, I'm assuming. Assessment that, and so the way teachers assess will potentially change as well. And then AI can help with assessments as well, right? So, there's lots of positives. And then the negative side of AI is how AI is being used by criminals, basically to lure young people into, apps that have been developed for young teenagers to have relationships with bots that are, their girlfriends and boyfriends, and, young teenage boys lured into that, or and thinking, this is what a relationship is, or sextortion, where AI audio is being used to imitate a young girl's voice when it's actually a male sitting in a country somewhere else anywhere in the world, pretending to be a girlfriend, or and then bribing those children. Then there's there's all kinds of examples, even on social media, where deep fakes of young people can be used, or AI being used, because it's so powerful and it's been designed by the app designers, not thinking ahead or maybe some of them do think ahead, that they're trying to lure young people to it. But I doubt that. I'd like to doubt that and give the tech companies and the CEOs of those companies the benefit of the doubt. But they haven't thought ahead of the implications that their technologies are going to have on young people. Because they're just forging away with, wow, AI, look what it can do. How far can we push it? And then they don't realize that young people who are naive and still, they're still growing up. They're not like you and I, Ben, whereas we know right from, we would know right from wrong. We're not going to be in that place to do to try the things that they are willing to do. So I feel AI has a dark side for young people, and it has benefits too. So, like all technologies, right? I guess.
Yeah. Well, Mina, I'll tell you what, I do have one final question for you. Obviously, our audience, SKUs, AV manufacturers, service providers, integrators, distributors, and obviously end users. What would you say maybe to the industry at large right now as we continue to develop these technologies to serve, the education community, the video conferencing community? What are some of the things that you'd like us to keep in mind as we continue to develop and offer services to the industry, especially maybe in your borough?
Right. Well, just carry on doing what you're doing. And I appreciate all the advancements that the cloud technologies have brought in with video conferencing, the ease, the flexibility of the use that we can just link the quality of the audio and video in a video call now. Here, talk about positives of AI there in a video call. Yeah. And what we've just experienced in the last 2-3 years with that. It's absolutely phenomenal. But I would also, as I said, tech companies don't often realize the implications of the brilliant technologies they're designing and implications it could have on young people. To bear in mind that what is happening with that data and how do you protect that data more so for young people? We've got images going up into the cloud. We've got their audio going up into the cloud. And what's happening to that? And what are they doing to protect it as much as possible?
Well, Mina, those are great words. And I think that's a great spot for us to wrap our conversation today. I know that we could probably talk about this for many days on end because there's so much nuance and it varies so much geographically. But I'll tell you, I appreciate, on behalf of the industry, thank you for sharing your expertise and giving us some extra context because it's always helpful, right? We don't always get to ask questions of people who are at the end of the line. And you are one of those folks really who speaks up and is vocal about your opinions and thoughts about some of the things and technologies in the industry. So thank you so much for coming on the show to share that with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Mina, and thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to check us out next time on Signal Flow.